today on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with Danny Limny-Schmitt, author of 10 Little Rules for Understanding America. Welcome, Danny.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
I am super excited to have you. This is a great book. I'm a little biased, of course, because I also have a 10 Little Rules book. So I understand the format and I absolutely love it. I also feel like you and I are going to have a lot to discuss because I did an adventure and you've done an adventure. They're different, but I think we'll have a lot to talk about. But before we really dive into it, can you give a quick little elevator pitch as to what readers are going to find when they open up 10 Little Rules for Understanding America?
Yes, absolutely. The 10 Little Rules for Understanding America is about challenging yourself, challenging your perspectives about what you think you know about the country we all call home. I was inspired to write this book because I was very curious about trying to understand America better in our age of polarization and seeming like we're coming apart as a country. And in response to that, I mostly drove, but traveled to every county in the US trying to better understand where we are as a country and why we maybe can't understand each other a little bit better. So I would say this book is really a chance for you to challenge yourself, challenge your biases a little bit by thinking about different places in America and what it can tell us about why we have ended up in kind of the uncomfortable situation that I think we can all agree we're in.
Absolutely. I would say, regardless of where you stand politically, you can say it's uncomfortable right now. So that's a true statement. I want to know how this all started. I mean, the idea to travel to every county, not every state. I know people who've traveled to every state, but you're talking every county, and that's like over 3,000 counties, isn't it?
Yes, it's just over 3,100 as of a couple years ago.
So how did that come about that you just said to yourself, gee, I think that's what I'm going to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's two things that I would say motivated me. One, I've always had this kind of wanderlust traveler spirit in me. Starting in about 5th grade, I started planning our family vacations because my parents are like, well, Danny probably knows how to find us better deals on a hotel and anything than we can anymore. So we'll just kind of let him drive as long as nothing goes off the rails. So I think there's that adventurous spirit that kind of animated me from a very young age. But more, I guess that's maybe not enough to make me want to go to every county. Maybe that's the kind of spirit that makes me want to visit every state.
Right.
I think what happened later was in college, I studied environmental science and geography, and I had a professor who taught us a field course. So a field course is kind of like when you go out and you're say on the western slope of Colorado extracting sediment cores from peat bogs and things like that, and you're camping every night. You're really doing hands-on research.
Right.
And that it kind of taught me the value of seeing things in the field as opposed to just reading about them or thinking about them theoretically. So that field class was actually in the fall of 2015, and I think, as we all know, the fall of 2016 was a very different time when a lot of Americans maybe for the first time recognized, including myself, that hey, maybe our country isn't on the track that we all had imagined. So to me, it was kind of a moment where I had just come off this field course, and I had talked with professors who see the value in traveling as a way to learn, that inspired me to say, well, what if I kind of took this on myself to learn from places by visiting them rather than just reading about them in in the New York Times or other major publications.
Absolutely. I have another question, and this is more about the nuts and bolts of it. When you say you visited a county, what constituted a visit? You drove through it?
So
you
yes.
ate there? What made a visit?
Yeah, absolutely. So according to the Extra Miler Club, which is a group of people who also kind of have, one, they just have crazy travel goals in general, but two, a lot of them try to visit every single county in the US. According to their criteria, all you have to do is enter the county, which means you cross the county line. Flying over it doesn't count, but you just have to be physically there. So it's a little bit of a liberal definition, and I very much counted that. I have a different metric where I count the number of counties I've properly visited, which means I had a meal there, or I stayed
Right.
overnight, or I visited a museum or a county park or something like that. So
Uh,
I don't like to say I've properly visited every county. I have just been to every
but you
county.
have
But of
been
course,
in every county. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And, you can only go so many miles without needing a place to stop or wanting to learn or seeing something you want to stop at, reading
Right.
those historical signs, from the State Historical Society that are just along the roadways or things
Right.
like that. They're just ways to kind of like piece together a little bit of a history of an area, even if I'm not like properly stopping at a museum for an hour
Right.
or something like that.
Right. Absolutely. I love that. I want to know what is the single most important thing that you learned while doing all of this traveling.
That's a tough question, but I'll do my best here. I would say one, just a humbling recognition that it's a really big and complicated country out there. I think all of us, based on where we live, based on who our friends are, based on where we work, we all live in our own kind of bubble in a way, and it's really hard to escape that. And of course, the tragedy of living in a bubble is you think or you want to believe that everyone is kind of sees things similar to the way you do, and then when you spend time in places very different from your own, it it really opens your eyes to the fact that, wow, we are a much more, not only diverse but just kind of complicated place made up of people of all different kinds of walks of life,
Right.
earning a living in very different ways, having very different lived experiences, whether it's urban rural divides or whether it's class divides. I think there's a lot you can learn just from taking a moment to step back and being humble about it, being saying
Right.
like, hey, there's a lot out there I don't know, and that's okay. Hopefully it's an inspiration to learn. That's what it was. That's what it was for me. You can't go in with the mentality of like, oh well, I already know all the answers and I'm gonna go
Prove
tell
that.
everyone else
Yeah.
why I'm right and they're wrong. That's not
Right.
gonna go over so well.
Right. I found that to be true as I was reading your book, that it was you several times talked about how you had an idea you thought you understood. For instance, you thought you understood what it was to be in the South, and you thought you understood all that was. And then you got there and it was like, okay, so I don't understand. There are things there are things at play here that I was unaware of. And I liked that you had that ability to be open and say, okay, I really am here to figure out what makes America tick.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's how I would summarize why I
Yeah.
wanted to do this and what kind of motivated me to keep going in some of the tougher moments.
Yeah.
It's like how do we kind of interact with each other
Right.
as a country, and how does each part contribute to the whole? And it's really hard to do that if you've only been to certain islands, let's say.
Right.
To
Right.
circle back to what you said about visiting every state, well, visiting every state is fine, and it's a great travel goal, and I would recommend it to anybody. But my main kind of cautionary tale with that is if you are flying into the largest city in every state and then staying at the Marriott and eating at a chain restaurant, you're not going to have much of an opportunity to really learn from as many places as if you kind of
Absolutely.
zoom in at the county level. I would almost suggest visiting every county in your home state might be a lot more illuminating to you than visiting all 50 states.
Right. Well, and I think about that in terms of my own home state. I live in North Carolina, and North Carolina is very large. It's 500 plus miles wide. We have an ocean, we have the Piedmont, we have the mountains. Those are very different. People who have lived as fishermen on the ocean for generations are very different than people who've lived in the Appalachian Mountains for generations. And yet we're in the same state. And so if you were to fly into Raleigh, for instance, or Charlotte, and that's where you spent your time, you would not understand North Carolina at the beach or North Carolina in the mountains, or even North Carolina in the rural parts in the center where farming is what drives people versus the banking in Charlotte or the medical and research that happens in Raleigh. It's just a very different. So I agree with you. I think it's just very interesting that you came up with this idea as a way to understand the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I'm can speak briefly about North Carolina,
Yeah,
I found it to be one of the more fascinating states to visit just because there are those three kind of major regions that you bring
right.
up, which maybe don't have as much in common with each other as they perhaps do with the regions directly north and south of them. You
Exactly.
know, moving from the Appalachian part of North Carolina, you know, there's probably a lot more in common with the western part of Virginia and West Virginia,
Yes.
eastern Tennessee, than it has with, say, coastal Carolina, which may be more similar to Myrtle Beach and going into South Carolina
Right.
and that area. So I would say it's kind of hard to, at least for me, it was very hard to just kind of study that in a theoretical sense and understand it. You know, if you look at
Right.
a map of North Carolina, they're going to have all the cities marked, and you know, it's hard to envision the fact that in the far western part of the state, what you're going to be doing is, you know, traveling through kind of often narrow canyons and valleys. But if you go east, it's going to be as flat as a pancake, and you know,
Exactly.
you know, so it's kind of hard to visualize those things just from seeing it on a map. But when you're physically there, it all comes to life a little bit more. And not just the
Absolutely.
physical landscape, but also seeing places like Charlotte and Raleigh really are, you know, they're kind of emblematic of the New South. They are places where um, you know, very college educated folks move to from all over the country,
Right.
uh, home of, you know, major corporations, where if you are heading sort to say the eastern side of North Carolina, it feels a lot more like the old South. And a lot of the towns, you know, the architecture, the buildings, it just hasn't, it looks like it hasn't changed that much
It
in
hasn't
the past
changed
half
in,
century.
yeah, it hasn't. It hasn't. And it's really interesting. And you can see along the coast right now, we have a lot of changes happening right now because all of a sudden there are a lot of people who are wanting to move here and retire here. And so there's a big building boom going on, but it's not bringing industry. It's just bringing retirees. And so what's
Yep.
happening is very different than what might be happening like around Raleigh, where the people who are moving in because of the industry. And
Yes,
so
absolutely.
there's families and there's lots of things happening. And so it's a very different, it's just very
Yes.
different in
Yeah.
the different places. And then you have places that are kind of in between all of that that people aren't moving to.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
and they
There
haven't
are
changed at
places that,
all. Yeah,
yeah, there are places that haven't seen the influx of kind of investment and new construction, and
exactly.
with it, new jobs and industry. If I have one small anecdote that I learned,
Yes.
not on this trip, but just out of my interest in geography in general, that really speaks to the fact that people often struggle to escape their bubbles. I've heard that the town of Cary, outside the Research
Yeah.
Triangle area,
Yeah.
is is like an acronym, containment area for relocated Yankees,
Yeah.
which I think speaks loudly to the fact that, hey, a lot of folks from, you know, the Northeast maybe have moved there for jobs
Right.
and opportunities, but they haven't dispersed equally across
No.
the region. They've almost kind of stuck together,
Yes.
despite being, you know, moving to the state from somewhere else. So I think
Right.
that kind of speaks to the fact that we often are just naturally more comfortable around those who maybe have similar backgrounds than us, and it takes a lot of effort to kind of break out of that bubble sometimes. And it's not necessarily anyone's fault, but it's something to be cognizant of, and hopefully use as inspiration to, um, you know, remain humble and learn from other people and places.
Absolutely. So, with the way the book is written, with the 10 little rules, tell me which is of your 10, which is your favorite rule?
Um, I would say my favorite is probably read the landscape, just because that kind of speaks to my background in geography. I think there's a lot you can learn just from, let's just say, driving in a car. Say you started in eastern North Carolina and drove all the way to the mountains. You could learn a lot if you kept your eyes open and just looked at both the human landscape and the physical landscape around you and how they might interact. So I would say if you are if you are curious and you don't just like plug in your directions onto Google Maps and then plug in whatever music you want to listen to and just kind of zone out, there's a lot that can be learned just from, you know, traveling between places. A lot of people have family in, say, you know, a different part of the state or different part of the country, and you know, are traveling between their new home and maybe their family home. And I think just by reading the landscape along the way, by paying attention, I think there's a lot you can learn, and that, of course, doesn't require you to plan some special trip to better
Right.
understand places.
Well, and I think one of the ways to do that as well would be to not necessarily take I-95 and instead try some of the secondary roads, because on secondary roads you see more of what's really happening. It's the way I feel like I've traveled to a few countries and gone on a cruise, and you stop in these different places, but where you're stopping is for tourists, and you don't really see the place. What you see is what they want you to see of the place. And
And
you
they
get
try
a
to sell you diamonds and everything else,
yeah,
right?
and so you get a very different feel for what is this place like. I stopped on a Greek island, and the whole time I was there, I kept thinking, I want to be on the island I can see over there. Because I think if I were there, then I would have a better understanding of what it might be like to be on a Greek island. Because where I
Yes.
was,
Yeah.
it was a tourist trap. They knew the cruise ship was coming.
Yeah.
And so they have everything prepared for that. And it's the same thing when you're traveling on a highway. What you have are chain restaurants and gas stations and, things that you're going to need while along the highway, but you're not really seeing things like, if you're in the center of North Carolina, you're not seeing cotton fields.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
I'm
you're-
really glad you brought up the interstate idea,
yeah,
because I have long thought of interstates as kind of like tunnels that get you from one place to another without, minimizing interaction with anything on
right,
either side of you. It's almost like you're
right,
in a tunnel. And even when you get off at the exits, like the chain restaurants are all going to be
right,
the same, the familiar hotel
right,
logos, the gas stations are, you're not really interacting with the places. It's more like, these are our service areas in the tunnel as
right.
we get to two more states down the highway.
Right. It's
So
a
I think
very
it's
a
so
very
much.
efficient way to get
Yes,
from point A to
absolutely.
point B, but
Yeah,
it is not a way if you want to learn anything about the
yeah,
state that you've been in. That's not the way to do
yeah.
it. Yeah.
You really have to be on the state or county roads that go through, say, the downtowns of the smaller towns or cities along the way. The interstates, even if you're going through, say, a mid-sized city somewhere, chances are, there'll be about 4 exits, but you're not going to see very much other than
No.
bridges over the highway or
Right.
things like that. So it's tricky. And your point about like the cruise ship, that I speak about that a little bit in the second rule, think like a local. If you're not having the opportunity to interact with locals, and you're just surrounded by tourists or locals who are just really there to sell the tourists things,
Right.
you're not going to have as much of a authentic or learning experience as if you have the chance to kind of interact with people in a more, slightly less like transactional way.
Yes. Yeah. So my husband and I rode across the United States on a tandem bicycle. So we started in Astoria,
So cool.
Oregon, and we rode to Washington, D.C. And we rode at an average of 10 miles an hour when you figured all the uphills and everything else. That is another way to really see the country. If you want to interact with locals, do it on a bicycle, because you're out there you're one-on-one. There's nothing between you and anyone else,
Yep.
and
Not even your glass
not even the
window
glass
of your car.
windows, right? You're just out there with people. And we really did meet a wide variety of very unique and colorful people. And it was wonderful. And I feel like the states that we went through, at least the portions of the state that we went through, I think we got an authentic experience. Northern Montana, I know it. And I
Yeah.
feel like I kind of know what makes it tick, and I know about the people, and I can tell you some great stories about them. So I do love that idea of like, get off the beaten path and get out there and just see what's there. And
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
people will be
Well,
surprised.
first of all, I love biking. Biking is honestly one of the things that probably helped inspire me to do this when I was
Yeah.
in high school and not even old enough to drive a car yet. I biked all around the Chicagoland area
Yeah.
on the various bike trails and roads, just trying to make sense of, a really complex, dynamic urban environment.
Right.
Why
Right.
why are some suburbs so, uh, you know, like ritzy and fancy,
And others are not.
and
Yeah.
then I also drive, bike through, neighborhoods closer to home that were more run down or something, so
Right.
it's like
Right.
understanding how, say, class and other dynamics are evident on the landscape as you're biking through it is a big part of, I think, what taught me from an early age that you can see a lot simply by traveling through a place and
Yes.
making an effort to observe and understand. And I think biking is in some ways a lot is almost better than driving because you're seeing everything at, you said 10 miles an hour or
Right.
something,
It's much
where
slower.
your eyes have more time to
Yes.
take in everything around you.
Well, and you also get to experience sounds, you get to experience smells, you get to, like, there are a lot of things that go on. I even noticed one time, it was crazy, as we went over, there was a stream that was running under the road. And when you crossed across the road on that stream that went under, the temperature changed. You could
Yeah.
feel the temperature go down while over the stream. Well, you don't ever notice something like that in a car.
No, because
You're never
probably blasting
gonna.
your air conditioner too
Yes,
much to
right.
notice.
And so you're never going to notice those things. And so it was really very interesting. The number of wildflowers that I saw that I thought were just unbelievably fascinating. I think my husband got tired of that because I would say, "Ah," and he'd say, "I know, wildflowers," and he'd pull over and let me get more pictures.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I heard of your book, I could not wait to read it and then talk with you about it, because despite the fact that we did things very differently, I felt like we had seen some of the same things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you saw, I would say, maybe a smaller number of places in greater detail,
Yes,
whereas
yes,
I tried to fill out the whole map, but I spent less time in the places I saw just by
right.
virtue of having
And
to get to so many different
we
ones.
ate at all of these little diners and very much not we weren't on the major roads. And so we weren't getting the major restaurants. We were getting, Little Joe's Diner and things like that, where you would just stop in and you'd find out that they're best known for their omelets or whatever. And then that's what you would eat that day. And it was really quite interesting. And we went during the summer of 2020. And, so that's COVID summer. It was political unrest. It was just a crazy summer. And prior to going, I think I had started to believe that our country was falling to pieces. And while on that trip, I realized people are more like me. There are more people like me than unlike me in terms of what do they want out of life. They want to be happy. They want their families to be happy. They want to have love. They want to be safe. And how we go about wanting those things might be different, but the basics of what we want are more similar than they are different. And that when you find that chance to sit down and really get to know people, the differences don't matter quite as much. And you start to recognize that we really are a whole. Now it's just a matter of all of us figuring out how to do that together instead of, fighting apart. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the line about we all have more in common than we have different is very true, but it's also gotten to the point of it being a bit trite at this point. Like everyone
Yeah.
wants to say that, of course. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
theoretically that's right. But then how come it feels like more divided than ever? And I think that is a really kind of tough question in our times. That it's like,
Yeah.
can both of these things be true at the same time? And how can we like reconcile those? How do you make sense of that? And it's really difficult. I think part of it is, for a while they blamed cable news for fragmenting us and dividing us, and now it's social media and podcasts.
And I think all
like
of those things probably have a hand in it. And it's really up to individuals to go out and just meet people. The more people that you meet that are different from you, that have different beliefs, that have different upbringing, that have different experiences, the more you meet a variety of people, the easier it is for you to accept that there are differences and to recognize that they really aren't that different. They're different, but they're not. They shouldn't have to pull us apart.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
as you meet more and more people, you feel more and more that way. But what's happening in our world is we all end up in these bubbles. And it's really hard to step outside of them. And so you need people like you and me telling people, get out of your bubble.
Yeah, I think that's true. At risk of sounding like self-congratulatory, I think
Yeah.
we
No,
could
but
also think about why people don't, and
right.
find ways to, you know, I don't know if America has the most places that that kind of make it easy to do that. I
Right.
think it's easier to stay in your bubble, and it's kind of too easy to blame people
Yeah.
for that. Um, and so, kind of thinking out like what kind of civic places or like opportunities are there to meet people that aren't just like yourself. And
Right.
I don't think there are a lot of options. So
I,
it's a little bit
so you really have
difficult.
you have to work really hard
Yeah.
to
And
do
it
so.
and it can be very hard to do that when you are, saying working three jobs at
Right.
once,
Exactly.
so it's tough. Like I don't think that the odds are not exactly in favor of us kind of coming together across our differences, just because of kind of like structural forces
Right.
that are pretty large. But not a good reason to give up. But I think recognizing it is at least a good first step.
Right. Absolutely. I want to know, is there, I know that the format is 10 little rules. When I was going through coming up with 10 little rules, I had more than 10. So I had to figure out which ones I was getting rid of. Did you have anything you did not put in?
Ah, that's a really good question. I also worked with Carol because I think when I came up with the original list, I had 17
Yeah.
and we had to work it down to 10. Generally, what we did was we tried to combine rules that
Right.
were a little bit
Yeah.
similar. I don't know if there's a lot that I felt that I couldn't put in. I think the fact that the book is only 22,000 words or so, that was the bigger limitation, not the number of rules, but figuring out which stories to
Which
share
stories to share. Right.
or how to do that. Because spending 5 years kind of doing this over long weekends and things like that, I had a lot of stories, and it was kind of hard to pick favorites
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, I kept a blog the whole way across the United States.
Oh,
And
that's
so
great.
to try to go through and figure out which of these tremendous number of stories, because every day I wrote a blog post. And so you go through all of that. Well, that's a whole lot more than what this book was, So you have to go through and figure out like what are the best stories. And that is a hard thing. So now that you've got the writing bug, will you do any more writing? Do you have any other writing ideas, or was this a one and done and you're moving on to other?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd always thought about writing let's call it like a more academic or scientific account of this,
Yeah.
where I'd write like a full 80,000 word book with, according to the U.S. Census Bureau in
Right.
this time, these counties are, and I'm like, well, that could be interesting, but I also feel that if my goal is to encourage people to observe more and judge less, maybe what's not needed is a academic treatise talking about all the polarization. I think there are plenty of those out there that really have influenced me and played their part in inspiring me
Right.
to continue to want to learn. But I don't know if like I'm as uniquely suited to write that book or not. Maybe I'm also, yeah, I would like to continue to write insofar as that it kind of has impact and it will inspire people to kind of read or think differently. But I
Yeah.
don't feel the need to write just for the sake of writing, if that makes
Okay.
sense. I think
No.
maybe what a better approach might be would be to create like a Substack or or Medium account, things like that, so I can share. Um,
Maybe
I don't know, share
some of the
things as they come
stories,
up.
or potentially
Yeah,
share some of
perhaps.
the stories that you didn't get to share in the book. You
Yeah,
know.
perhaps stories like that, or obviously I'm still traveling, and maybe
Right.
there's a story that I haven't quite had yet, and but that would make a great analogy, or just a good short story to
Yeah.
share. So I think maybe something like that is in the future. Um, I've thought about trying to write more specifically for, say, like a journalistic outlet. I think
Yeah.
they're because of the journal, like how difficult I think the journalism industry is right now to even pay their full-time staff writers. I think it's kind of hard for them to say, oh yeah, we're gonna have guest essays from others. Um, so I don't have the highest hopes there, but
Right.
I would like to continue to share more, and I think that there are probably more stories to share.
Wonderful. So, hey guys, if you want to keep this conversation going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. There you will have a chance to win a digital copy of 10 Little Rules for Understanding America. Tell me something that you liked or learned on the podcast, and you will be in the drawing. So, Danny, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, talk with you about your travels, talk with you about things that you learned, how to maybe do something similar themselves, how do they do that? What's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, sure. I'm on all the social media platforms, so I'd say LinkedIn or Facebook are probably the best bets. I share photos from travels, not just around every county in the U.S., but just other travels I've done on Instagram as well, if you want the more visually driven effect. But yeah, I would say I have a couple people around the Denver area have heard my story on Axios Denver or some other local news outlets and have asked to meet for coffee. And then, they share they share their perspective, which
Right.
in Denver means they've often moved here from somewhere else and are trying to reconcile the very different place Denver is compared to wherever they grew up. And so I think starting a conversation is always a good thing. You never know what people are going to have in common. And I think making time to hear other stories is kind of in the spirit of what I'm trying to do with the book.
Absolutely. So, guys, make sure you run out, first of all, and grab a copy of 10 Little Rules for Understanding America. You're going to love it. Once you've read it and loved it, make sure you review it. And feel free to reach out to Danny, and he'll reach back to you and talk with you about whatever it is that you want to talk about when it comes to travel and understanding the United States. So, Danny, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much, Terry.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.